My name's Jessica Yarger, and I'm a volunteer with the UC Cooperative Extension LA County Master Gardener Program. This is a recorded Garden in Place presentation that was presented live May 12th, 2020. The topics in this presentation include caring for your tomatoes, citizen science projects, as well as some updates from Master Gardeners from previous presentations. And some of these topics include seedlings and sweet potatoes. I hope you enjoy the workshop.
Good morning and welcome to the online Master Gardener Workshop, Garden in Place. This morning, we're going to start right off with Master Gardener Jessica Yarger telling us all about tomatoes. Everything that you need to know, well, maybe all of the basics. Jessica?
There's so much to say about tomatoes, so I'm really trying to keep it at the very kind of minimum basics. And then at the end of the slide presentation, I have a short video on how to transplant. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, so tomatoes. This is the prime time to be planting them if you haven't gotten them in the ground already. It's kind of right at the edge here of it being too late to plant, although there's one little caveat to that I'll get to in a minute. So for me, tomatoes, why I grow them is because there's just no comparing their taste, flavor to the homegrown tomato to any other tomato you can get anywhere. And I think most gardeners who grow tomatoes will tell you that homegrown tomato is the best. There's no comparing. They're fairly easy for most. I think some people might have a rough go the first time and then kind of give up, but I do think that with some practice and experimentation, because there are so many varieties, that you will find some that work good for you. And that's another reason to grow them, is that there are so many varieties, and growing your own, you can choose what you want to grow, and you'll have access to types of tomatoes that you just can't find even at a farmer's market. And then also you can harvest them when they're at their prime. So that would be my pitch for you to give it a go if you haven't already. All right, so if you're just starting out with tomatoes, where do you start? So typically, gardeners plant tomatoes by seed several months ago. I start mine in a greenhouse-like space in January, so that I have nice, big, sturdy seedlings to transplant in April. But you can, if you can transplant now. Right here, we're at mid-May. You would have to get a fairly good sized transplant into the ground at this point. And they do need to be in a sunny location. Minimum of 6 to 8 hours, 8 hours even better. Tomatoes like the sun and need it to grow properly. Tomatoes, depending on the variety, are going to take up, they're not a sprawling plant if they're properly supported, but they do get tall and bushy. So the recommendation is to space your plants out at least 30 inches. However, I know a lot of people who don't, because they're trying to squeeze in as many varieties as you can get in. But you do, if they're packed together like mine are, you are more susceptible to spreading if you get a disease or a pest around your plants. But typically people use a cage or a tomato cage for support, because tomatoes can grow up to 7 feet tall, and they definitely need a support. If they're let to go on the ground, it's going to kind of spread out and sprawl on the ground, and the fruit that's touching the ground is much more likely to get eaten by the critters crawling around down there. So you can buy tomato cages at any of your hardware stores or nurseries. The little round ones with the little stakes you stick in the ground. Personally, I find that those often aren't big enough or strong enough, and if I can, I don't have them now at my home, but at my school garden we've used the wire for the concrete that reinforces the concrete, and then created cylinders out of that, and use those to support the tomatoes, stake those into the ground. They don't tip over if they're secured properly, and they're really tall enough for those tomatoes, especially the cherries that get super tall. And then of course they're a warm season crop. There are some people who can overwinter their tomato plants, cherry tomatoes. They won't produce much in the cooler seasons, if at all, but they will bounce back if there isn't a frost that totally kills them off. They will bounce back. But typically this is a summer plant. So if you are buying a plant in a nursery or you're starting them from seeds, there's going to be a lot of information and terminology that might be new to you, or I'm not sure what it means. And the first one is some tomato plants are what we call determinate and others are indeterminate. And a determinate tomato generally sets all of its fruit all at the same time or within about a 4 to 6 week period. Once the fruit's set and it's ripened, the plant just dies back, it's done. It's not going to give you any more tomatoes. You can find a lot of container varieties are determinate because these are also smaller plants. And some canning like paste tomatoes sometimes are determinate because if you're planning on canning something and preserving it, you want a big crop all at once. And indeterminate, this is a plant that grows, blooms, sets fruit, and keeps growing, blooming, and setting fruit throughout the growing season. So I typically grow these just because I want to have that continual fruit and harvest throughout the summer. And many, many varieties are indeterminate. And these are the ones that get fairly large in terms of their length, their height, and can get fairly bushy. A lot of the larger tomatoes as well, like your beefsteaks, are also indeterminate because they're just this longer growing season plant. So, I mean, depending on what you want from your harvest will determine if you're choosing, and also your growing space, if you're choosing determinate or indeterminate tomato plants. So if you've got smaller space, maybe a shorter amount of time to grow, or you're growing in containers, choose determinate, and then indeterminate if you want that longer, kind of more continual harvest. Sometimes you will have information whether they're early, mid, or late season, and this is just telling you when the fruit is going to be ripe. Some people, will plant an early season tomato mid-summer to extend their growing season and get a tomato harvest later in the summer or early fall. I personally have never tried this, but I know people who do it. And then you'll also see these letters F, V, and T on seed packets. And this is indicating resistance to certain pests and common threats to our tomato plants. So we have a couple wilts and nematodes, which are a root. They're like, it's a little thing that gets in the root, makes them very knobby, and it prevents the plant from taking up the nutrients that it needs, and a virus. So if your seed packet or seedling is marked with these letters, it's indicating that it's resistant. It doesn't mean that it's immune, but it does mean that the plant has more resistance than some others for these particular pests. And there are so many, I'm going back to the varieties, there's so many kinds and shapes and sizes and colors of tomatoes. And again, this is a great reason to grow them yourself. You have everything from cherries to your bigger beefsteak sort of type tomatoes, and your Romas, so the longer sort of oblong tomatoes, Romas and paste tomatoes. Those have less water. So if you want to grow tomatoes to make sauces, I would recommend a Roma or a paste tomato. There are yellow, pink, kind of purplish or black hued tomatoes as well. So you can get recommendations from your gardening friends or just try a bunch and see which ones you like. This year I'm only growing one tomato that I've grown before. All the other varieties are new to me, and just kind of trying to explore and see what other tomatoes I like. I have 8 in the ground, and I'm trying to figure out where I can put a couple more because there's so many out there to try. Now, once your tomatoes are in the ground, I'm going to talk a little bit about caring for them. So tomatoes, their root depth is about kind of mid-level, and they do need consistent watering throughout the summer. It's important to water tomatoes like most vegetable crops at their base, and not to shower the plant from above. If you shower the plant from above, you're likely, if your plant has a pest or a disease, it can spread it around. It also creates a humid environment for the bushy leafy parts of the plant. So water at the base, water evenly and regularly. Fertilizing, you can fertilize upon planting your plant, but then not again until after the fruit has set and the blooming and the fruit set's well underway. If you over-fertilize a tomato, especially with nitrogen, you'll get a nice, beautiful green leafy plant and not very much fruit. So you can get fertilizers that are formulated specifically for tomatoes, but just remember once upon planting, and if you want to fertilize again after the fruit set is well underway. So there's often a debate about to pinch or not to pinch the fruits, the suckers, not the fruit, but there's a Y. So at the point where 2 branches separate, the plant will send out another shoot that what we call a sucker. And there's some people believe, oh, pinch, pinch, pinch those suckers out, and others say no, no, no. And I don't think that there's really a right or a wrong. It's just there's like pros and cons of reasons why you would choose to pinch those suckers or not. For me, I live in an inland valley and it gets super hot. You know, we have those blazing hot days in the summer, and I don't pinch because the extra foliage protects the tomatoes from getting scalded by the sun. So I also just don't often have to go out there and do it. Some people, if you're staking your tomatoes instead of using cages, so that's the process of using just a single stake stuck in the ground and using twine or some other material to kind of tie your tomatoes up to the stake, would say to pinch because you kind of need to get rid of some of that weight and excess so that you can properly support your plant. But in the hot climates, with really hot days, those tomatoes really need protection from that direct sunlight. The other drawback to not pinching those, that you do create an environment, especially that can hold a little bit more moisture, a little more humidity. So if you're having trouble with certain pests that kind of thrive in that warm, hot, wet environment, you can pinch back to create a little more airflow in your plant. So some common problems are the blossoms dropping or fruit not setting, and they can be caused by a couple of reasons. So if there's no fruit set, it might be that our nights are still a little bit cool, below 55 degrees. The evening temperatures need to be warmer than that for the fruit to set consistently. It also can mean that it's getting too hot during the day. So some varieties are more resistant to this and do better in those hot summer days. But if it's above 90, 95 degrees consistently for several days, your tomato will stop setting the fruit. It'll bloom but then it'll just drop the flowers. It also can mean that your plant's not getting enough sunlight, or it's just, it's too shady. Also smog. If it's fairly smoggy, that also can prevent the fruit from setting in your plant. Another problem is, a common one is blossom end rot, and this is when the end where the flower was attached gets a little dark brown spot and is rotting, and that is due to inconsistent watering, which affects the plant's ability to take in calcium. So that's just, it can be prevented by just keeping that even moisture. If you have a really sandy soil, it's easier to get this because the water's draining away so quickly. And then some common pests are the wilts that I already spoke about at the beginning, and those live in the soil, and really the only way to prevent those is to buy resistant varieties. I typically don't look for that stuff, and I just roll the dice, and some years I've had a lot of wilt and others none at all. Later in the season, you might find those giant hornworm caterpillars on your plants. They come in the soil as well, and they can actually be brought into your garden from your seedlings from the nurseries as well. And they are huge green caterpillars that have a horn on the front, and they're exactly the same color as the tomato plant. So you may not notice it until it's like right in your face. But one way you can see that you have caterpillars are droppings. You might see those first, and that would be your indicator to look for the caterpillars. And then I already talked about fertilizer. So again, just to reiterate, just put if you want to use it upon planting, and then again after there's a good fruit set, and not to use too much nitrogen. Let's see. So harvesting is, the tomatoes are best upon ripening right on the vine. Just wait until they are the deep color that they should be, whether that be yellow or orange or red or pink, and pick them off. It's best to store tomatoes on your counter. Once they're in the refrigerator, the coolness breaks down an enzyme in the tomato that then will diminish and deteriorate the flavor. If you're at the end of the season and you're wanting to pull your tomato plant out and you still have lots of green or some green tomatoes on there, you can harvest your tomatoes green and then ripen them on your counter. They should not and don't need to be in direct sunlight, but it's the heat that ripens them up. So any area above 70 degrees in a place that's out of the direct sun will ripen, your tomatoes will ripen on the counter. It might take a while, but they will ripen right there on your counter. So that's the way, if you're ready to clear out and start your fall planting, you can extend your tomatoes just another week or two. Okay, that's it for the slides. So I'm going to stop that share. And then I have a short video on how to transplant tomato seedlings.
Actually, Jessica, if you want to hang in for 1 second, we do
Sure.
have some questions that have accumulated, and maybe this would be a good moment to get some of those in before we move too far along.
Great.
And I know other folks have been logging them, but one of the ones I'm seeing frequently is questions about fertilizer. To asking again whether they should do fertilizer every day, like a fish emulsion, or are there specific fertilizers for tomatoes that are better than others?
I generally use, if I use fertilizer at all, I often don't fertilize my tomatoes, but if I do, I purchased one that's formulated for tomatoes specifically. I have one, I don't have it in front of me, so I couldn't tell you the numbers on top. So if there's another master gardener who knows that offhand, but it's easy to over fertilize a tomato with nitrogen, and then you compromise your fruit set. So you get a beautiful plant and no fruit. So it's sparingly, if you want to put fertilizer in when you do your transplanting into the ground, and then again only after the fruit set is well underway. So like mid-season or something, but I wouldn't do it every day or every week, just like once in a while.
Right. So to re-emphasize what you're saying is the fertilizer, if you're going to use it, is good when you first put it in the ground. But because there's nitrogen, which promotes leaf growth instead of fruit set,
Yes.
You don't want to be giving a tomato plant nitrogen while it's trying to set the fruit. And once all the fruit is solidly set, maybe some more nitrogen doesn't hurt. But of course, with an indeterminate variety, it's setting fruit all season.
Yeah.
So it's, once at the beginning and once when you put it in the compost pile, huh? All right. We do have other questions, but let me go ahead and let you go on with the next piece, and then we'll try to get to some more questions in a bit. Any questions we don't get answered here live, we're logging them and we'll post them up on the community resources page so that you can get your question answered there as well. All right. So Jessica?
All right, let me try this again. There we go. Okay. Hey everybody, I'm going to talk to you about transplanting tomatoes. First I'm going to hold up this tomato seedling up close. Today I'm going to be planting into a bigger pot. Normally this time of year you probably want to be putting your tomatoes in the ground. It's mid-May. But just for the purposes of this video and for technique, because it's the same whether you're planting in a pot or in the ground, I'm just going to be planting in a pot. So this tomato is still quite young, but it doesn't matter because whether they're big or small, the technique is pretty much the same. So first I'm going to gently take my seedling out of its current container, and I'm going to gently tip it over and let it fall out and flip it over. There, you see it? Okay. So when I'm handling a seedling, I don't want to grab it by the stem, because if I break the stem, then the plant's done. If I hold it by leaves or down here, it's all right. If I tear a leaf off by accident, not a big deal. So the thing about transplanting tomatoes is that it is best to transplant them as deep as possible. So in the case of this tomato, I'm going to pinch off these first couple leaves, exposing a long stem. And when I transplant it, I'm going to bury the stem up till about here. And why we do this is that the stem will then send out roots from the buried part, making for a stronger plant with a bigger root system. Every time I repot or plant a tomato, I do the same thing. So when this was a little sprout, I moved it from the 2-inch pot into a 4-inch pot, burying it as deep as I could, and I'll do so again when I put it into my gallon container. If this grows tall and I decide to put it in the ground, I would again bury it as deep as I could, maybe removing the first couple branches so that I could get more stem under the ground. Okay, so I'm going to make some room and gently put it in there. I'm going to actually go a little deeper. Move some of that dirt. There we go. Okay, and then gently, kind of holding it upright by the leaves, I've got the leaves, I'm going to start to fill it in around the stem. Get some soil here. Okay. And I'm going to get it up as high. There we go. Okay, so now my plant looks kind of short again, because I've buried the length of the stem in there. Okay. And doing this, like I said before, will create a plant that's got a much stronger root system. Okay. So every time you transplant tomatoes, plant them as deep as you can, up to the first set of leaves, or in this case, when there's much space between sets of leaves, you can actually pinch off. Some people just bury the leaves. I tend to pinch them off. And that's it.
Awesome. I really appreciate the actual demonstration of the planting. I noticed you piled the dirt up a little bit on the stem to get those new roots growing out of the stem. That's something cool you can do with tomatoes, but you can't do with other plants, can you?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, right. They typically tend to say pot height, but tomatoes are the great exception. Plant it wrong is what I always tell people. Awesome. We have some other questions. Master gardeners that have been monitoring the chat. Do you have some questions you want to read out for us to get to Jessica for just a minute?
Yeah, we have a question on powdery mildew and how to deal with that on tomatoes.
Yeah, powdery mildew. So powdery mildew is one of those that likes a moist, kind of humid environment. We get it on our squashes and melons as well too. One for sure for that is to water at the base of your plants. Showering overhead is going to create an environment where that can grow. Also, if it's really problematic, that might be a situation where you pinch, do a little pinching to get more airflow into the plant, and so that it's a drier environment in there. Not scientific, but something that I know other gardeners use is a milk solution where you dilute. I've not used it for my squash. I haven't ever used it on a tomato plant because I haven't actually gotten to powdery mildew on tomatoes before. But it's it's a very diluted, just like cow's milk in a spray bottle. Maybe 1 part milk to 10 parts water, and you spray it on. It's not going to cure it, but it helps prevent it to spread. This is not like a sciencey thing backed up by UC, but many gardeners say that it works. And I feel like it is something that you have to do sort of a lot, like consistently, like go out there every morning, and pinch off the leaves that are most affected, that have the most powdery mildew on them, and then spray to prevent the spread.
And of course, I forgot to unmute. Awesome, Jessica. Thank you. Powdery mildew is one of those things. If anybody ever invents a cure, you'll be a millionaire. So experiment in your garden, and if you can figure it out, you have a product. We do have lots of other questions, but I want to go ahead and get started on the next presentation. And then at the end, if we have time, we'll go back and do some more of the questions. We are logging the questions, and if your question doesn't get answered here live on the video, we will attempt to put up a written response on that community resources page once again. So I greatly appreciate, there's been a steady stream of questions so far, and I think we've covered a few. Excellent. Well, thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much. We are going to go hear now from Christy, who is going to talk to us a little bit about science, a little something different that you can do out in your garden. There's an old saying about the best fertilizer is the gardener's shadow. And what it means is that you need to go look at your garden every day, even if you don't do something. Look at it, watch it, see what's happening, and understand what's happening. And a little citizen science is a good way to get yourself out there observing. Christy, are you ready to roll?
I'm ready. Good morning, everybody. I'm Christy, Master Gardener Christy, and before I jump right into my presentation slides, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my background with the Master Gardener programs. A little different than a lot of my partners and cohorts. I do more on the pollinator side of things and tracking insects and wildlife in the garden. And so keeping that in mind, I spend a lot of time with citizen science and doing outreach on bugs. So let me go ahead and get my sharing going here with my screen. Okay, so observations in the garden. Observations in the garden right now during a COVID stay-at-home order is something that we might have a lot more time to be doing. And I think it's a really cool thing to focus on when we have that extra time. Oh, there we go. So getting started, reasons to venture out and observe the garden. Plain and simple, it's really fun. It's fun to dive in and get up close and see what's going on in a world that's outside of our own human world. It's a great learning experience for all ages and levels. There are no limitations. We can gain an understanding of life cycles and beneficial wildlife, and we can apply that knowledge to our integrated pest management. I know we had some integrated pest management topics that happened previous to this one today, and there may be some more coming back, and we have plenty of information out there through our Master Gardener program on how to use our beneficial insects and how to use what's going on in the garden to benefit the growth of our plants. And observations can help science and research progress. So researchers can't do this alone. They need people like us, just lay people, to go out and collect all the data that, that simply you can't have one team in an office back in Minnesota that is going to be able to collect information all over the country. So another pretty cool thing is there aren't any required tools to observe, but the following items can really enhance your experience. A magnifying lens, a camera, or phone with a camera. I use my iPhone pretty much every time I go out into my garden and I'm getting up close. It also has the ability to zoom in, and you can get some really fantastic pictures of what you're seeing. A journal, sketching and painting materials, if that's something you're interested in, just a way to take notes. And if you really want to get into it, a net and a bug jar or mesh cage, so you can collect things, take a look, and then release them. So observations of a plant community. Observations can take place anywhere that plants grow and are accessible to anyone interested in looking deeper in the garden. For us, we're probably looking more in our home garden, maybe our landscape yards, our edible beds, our trees, and our potted plants. But we're not limited to that space. You know, we're stuck home at COVID, you might have kids, you might want to get out of the house once in a while and take a walk. You can check out parkways, medians, any type of city public place that has any type of plants growing, even weeds. Our parks are a great place to take a look. And outside of COVID, probably more so the nature trails and open space. Although there are still some places still open if you wanted to get out of your house and go check it out. But there's really no limitation on what you're gonna be able to access. And I like the idea of it being an all-inclusive activity. So here's one of the places that I like to visit. This is a local park by my house, a park I had a lot of input in helping design, which is more like a big, wild, crazy patch of milkweed here. But I monitor this park and check the milkweed for life cycles in the plant community here. And that's Washington Park, by the way, in Pasadena. And so plant communities, when we talk about plant communities, a plant community includes all living plants in a shared habitat which interact with one another. We'd be looking for insects, birds, mammals, reptiles, and other local wildlife within the specific environment. Plant communities often occur together due to the habitat requirements. So a riparian or chaparral might be something we find up in the mountains, but we know that our edible beds have certain creatures and insects that are on those types of plants. So you're going to find plant communities that are more organized. So it creates an organized, recognizable set of communities. I call them the garden players. I know that we just talked about the tomato hornworm. That's something that you're probably going to see if you're growing tomatoes. And there are ways to be managing those types of animals. This is the picture I captured in my yard on one of my flowering plants. And again, these are, you get up close with your camera and you're gonna find all kinds of neat little things happening in the yard. This is some kind of true bug, and it's gonna be probably sucking on my plants. So I wanna learn about this, look it up, use the resources out there to try to identify these insects. I let them be, but if they're starting to infest my yard, then I have techniques that I can use to control them. And so once you're ready to observe, it's important to keep the following factors in mind when venturing out for observation. Choose a space that you can return to with some regularity. If you're going up into the mountains and it's a place you're only going to go once a year, then that's something that's not going to probably work out to be documenting on any regular basis, but maybe that's something annual that you'll be doing. View the overall landscape to determine the plant community. So get to learn that habitat and understand what those players are that are going to be in that habitat. Get up close. You have to dig in there. You might have to move some plants around and look for those garden players and start to make the connections. Gardens are ever evolving. Look for both constants and changes between time intervals. Note time, light, and the weather. And here's a flower. This is a Love in the Mist or Nigella flower that's growing in my backyard. And I just wanted to show you a quick image of this because you can see that it has a lot going on. It's very intricate. And you might start to make the connections to what types of insects you're seeing landing on certain plants that have intricate parts. So all flowers have different shapes. I know a lot of our butterfly pollinators want to land on plants that have a landing pad. This might not be the best place for a butterfly. And journaling your observations. Journaling or documenting observations can be done in the following ways depending on your level of desired detail. So mental notation or just using your memory. For some people, that's the level they want to keep it at. Oh, I saw those bugs last week and I'm seeing them again, and that's enough. They can log in their garden community in the For me, photography is a big one. I take a lot of images. These are images of my monarch caterpillars and some of the infestation of the tachinid fly that's infecting them. And so these are things that I would be documenting using my photography. I do like using my iPhone because I can actually go back and it has a timestamp on it and also a location without me having to write anything down. But of course, journaling, writing something in a journal, to the right of the screen, you're seeing one of my citizen science projects where I am required to write down all the data when I'm out in the field. And field sketching, I have a lot of friends that love to sketch out and draw pictures of what they're witnessing. So here's a picture of me monitoring the rate of my milkweed growth. And this is just something you can see. There's actually an egg kind of almost smack in the center of the picture, but going out again on those regular intervals and checking to see how the plant growth is. And then if you have those journals, you can be checking back from prior years. And again, on journaling, once you've decided on your method of documentation, it's important to aim for detailing as much information as possible. Keep in mind your journal can help with future garden plans. It's the garden evolution. So once you've been detailing something and documenting, you can use that to make plans for how you think you can do better in the future based on the history. Help learn to recognize the web of life in the garden. Again, we talked about IPM, your beneficial insects. When you start seeing these web of life and how this insect that might be looked as the bad guy actually needs to be there to keep these other animals in check, everything is balanced. So you want to try to aim for that balance of having the good players and the not so friendly ones like those tomato hornworms. And it helps you to connect with nature. Just getting outside, especially in the state we're in with this COVID situation and stay-at-home orders, getting outside just in your yard or taking a walk up and down the block can really still connect you with the outdoors. And the data can be helped to use in research like we discussed. So you can see this is a picture of my milkweed documented on March 13th, and then again on March 17th, so almost a month later. And then jumping into the citizen science projects. So citizen science is amateur public participation in scientific research, participatory monitoring, and action research whose outcomes are often advancements in scientific research, as well as an increase in the public's understanding of science. And the opportunities for everything that's out there under this topic is almost endless. So there is no age limit or level that you cannot find a project that you might find interest in that you would like to participate in. That's another reason why I like to dive into citizen science. It's all inclusive. And so just another picture, another flower structure. So there are over 150 milkweed species. This is a blue Tweedian milkweed. And I just like to specify that there's so many different things out there just for one species. There might be hundreds or even thousands of a species in one plant. So you're gonna find garden players that are in these different plant communities with all these different species depending on where you're located. And here's some of the links to the projects that I'm involved in or that I recommend, even though, like I said, it's endless. Monarch Alert is an organization that I tagged through out of Cal Poly up in San Luis Obispo. And again, this is open to the public. They're sort of on a hiatus right now, but check it out. They have a lot of great information there. But we do tagging of monarchs, monarch butterflies, and some health testing on monarchs. And Journey North is a great one if you have kids. Journey North is a group that does everything from tracking monarchs and a lot of other animals, not just insects. There's a lot to choose from on the Journey North website, but great for kids. They've tied a lot of the science and education in there to the national standards. So that's really great if you are doing some homeschooling right now. And iNaturalist is probably the #1 overall that I would recommend. There are almost endless projects there. It's also a great place to find your ways to ID plants or insects or animals in general. And the Natural History Museum of LA does an LA BioBlitz. So it's part of iNaturalist, but it's specific to that project where they go out during certain designated times, and we all go out and you document, use your phone, and you put all your information in there. And it's something that the researchers actually utilize to write their research papers on whatever they're studying that might be uploaded into these projects. And Xerces has a lot of different information and great great resources, but the Bumblebee Watch is one of their citizen science projects. So you can track the bumblebees in your yard or wherever you are and upload them to the Xerces Bumblebee Watch. The Pollinator Partnership is a collaborative of a lot of different organizations, US Fish and Wildlife, just a lot of different big organizations. And underneath them, I use the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper. And so we're tracking milkweed all over the West. So anytime you're out and about and you see milkweed, take a picture and plug that away. And that's also helping researchers identify where the milkweed is, so we can try to figure out where our monarchs are migrating. But there are a lot of other good materials and projects within Pollinator Partnership as well. And the Great Sunflower Project was one of my earlier projects I participated in. And that's where you grow certain kinds of sunflowers, and then you go out in 15-minute increments and you count the bees on the sunflower and you report those findings, and they use that in research as well. So just being at home, you can significantly help researchers and science and progress and move forward. And I think that's really cool. It's something I just love doing, and I love sharing that with others. So I'm going to open it up for questions right now. I'm not following the chat. So open up for questions, and I'm going to move it over just for now so you can see my links. I have a website where I have a lot of these links, but they'll also be posting the links that were on the slide before as well.
Cool. Yes, we have been monitoring the chat over there. So far, I think folks are mostly cutting and pasting the links because they were kind of interesting. I will point out an interesting thing. There's been research recently that shows that bees, especially native bees here in California, use sunflower pollen as a way to medicate against parasites. We'll talk more about that another time, but apparently they only come to sunflowers for that reason, because the protein is not very good for them as it's not high quality, and they tend to just not go there unless they are self-medicating for parasites. Kind of weird things that science can let you know.
I'd like to throw one more thing out there. I like to continue with this this idea on observations and kind of move more into the pollinator range. So if people wanted to type in the chat whether or not they're interested in seeing more, kind of continuing this into the citizen science or into more on the monarchs or anything like that, that would be great to type that in there, or send an email for future interest.
And actually, what I'd recommend better would be to go onto the Facebook Community Resources page. And if you don't want to post a public comment, go ahead and use a message there, a Facebook message, to get it to all of us so we can check in on where you need to get your information to. Awesome. All right. Thank you, Christy. I know that I go out in the garden every time and I see things and I grab the pictures, and if I leave the geolocation on, I can put them up in iNaturalist later and find out, oh my goodness, that's actually a dog vomit slime mold.
Yeah.
And with all the rain, we've had it. So there you go. Awesome. We are coming near the end of our hour, but we do have a few minutes left, and we want to spend some time checking in on some old projects. We've planted some things here, and we have a number of folks who have 2-minute updates, and then really is 2-minute update on what they've been doing. So I want to flash through, starting with Joan, and then popping over to Jessica, pardon me, and then jumping over to Daniela and other folks that might have updates. And then at the end, we can open it up for more questions and answers if we have a little bit of time. All right. So, Joan, are you ready?
Yes, I am. I have to show you, and I'll have some pictures to show you better. My basil that I planted a few weeks ago, I know I planted the seeds on April 25th, and I showed you last week that they had grown a little bit. And, well, they had grown more than I thought they would. What I mean is, if you may remember or not, that they were very old seeds, and I didn't know if anything would grow at all. That's what they look like just about a week after I had planted them. And I have to admit that right now I'm so pleased they're still going. They look a tiny bit bigger, but they're not a lot bigger at all. but they are still alive. And for that, I am grateful. And I hope that they live long and prosper. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed about that. I'll keep you updated. Pretty soon, I hope I'll be able to show you that they grew a lot. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Again, those really old seeds, you never know. You might get one, you might get 10, worth a chance. Jessica, you are going to come back to the magic potato.
Yes, so I think it was April 7th I did my potato presentation, and I talked briefly about sweet potatoes and how they're kind of a different animal than our regular potatoes. And I had one sitting in water at that point to grow what we call slips. I'm going to try to hold this up here to the camera. So this potato, sweet potato, has now grown. This is way past the time when I would normally plant it because I just haven't gotten around to it. So you can see that it's sent out a lot of roots, and I have 2 slips. I have one here, and these are the leaves that are growing, and one over here that's actually quite long, way longer than I would normally let it grow before planting it into the soil. So normally you would pull your slips off of the sweet potato when it's about 5 to 6 inches long. And I'm going to pull one off right here now. I'm going to start with this really long one. So you just gently, with fingers, just as close to the potato as you can, you're going to snap the vine off, taking with it a cluster of roots. Now, normally this would be a lot younger, and I would then stick the roots and the slip back in some water so that I could grow more roots. But because this plant is so mature now with the great root system, I can now go ahead and plant this into some really loose soil so that I can start growing my sweet potatoes. I have this other one on the other side. It's a little smaller, so I might pinch this one off and then let it sit in water for another week just so it can grow a more robust root system before planting it into the soil. And that's it.
Very cool. And that's really different than regular potatoes. A regular Idaho potato, you would get the sprout and you put a big chunk of potato in the ground with the sort of as a seed potato.
Yeah. I mean, they are different plants. They are not related, so they grow, and their growing habit is much different.
And I think you mentioned last time that those vines will spread out on the ground, and where they spread out and touch the ground, they'll dive down and create a sweet potato there.
They will. So if you want lots of small sweet potatoes, let the vine attach and send down roots. If you want one cluster of larger sweet potatoes, make sure you're picking those vines up off the ground to prevent those roots from taking hold.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm amazed how much that potato has grown in just a couple of weeks. Master Gardener Daniela,
Jessica.
are you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Can I ask you a quick question? So that plant, will that grow one potato, or will that slip grow multiple potatoes?
It'll grow multiple potatoes.
And if I understood you correctly, the root system for the main plant will go down and create a cluster of potatoes there, and anywhere else it happens to touch the ground and send more roots down.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Master Gardener Daniela, are you around?
I am.
Awesome. And you have an update for us as well.
Yes. So 2 weeks ago, I had a little presentation on starting plants from seed, and I had 4 seeds. This is my first one. This is a squash plant. Okay, so everything was planted 2 weeks ago. So squash grows quite fast. It germinates in about 4 or 5 days to a week, and then it starts growing quite well. So I'm pretty pleased with the squash. I was not as lucky as Joan was with old seeds. So this is a tomato plant. I had planted about 10-15 seeds in this little pot, and only one germinated. But my seeds were also from 2013. 1 out of 15 is, for a tomato, I'm quite happy with that too. Could have been better, but it's okay. And finally, I had planted from seed a bean. This is my bean. Does everybody see it? And the bean also grew about 4 inches. Beans are fast growing plants as well. I already transplanted this in the ground because this bean is going to take off and grow really tall and will need a support because bean plants are mostly vines. My 4th seed was corn, and I am really sad to announce that I had a casualty there. My seed did not germinate, and I have nothing to show. So this happens sometimes. I got 3 out of 4.
Awesome. Well, 3 out of 4, 75%. That's not a terrible thing.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that some of those old seeds are still coming around. So I have a very quick update to show you that's actually more of a surprise. One of my acquaintances found an old tomato in their refrigerator, and they were preparing to make lunch and sliced it open, and lo and behold, the seeds inside the tomato had started to sprout. And it'll do this, especially if it's a very old tomato. So they said, what the heck? And went ahead and planted those, and there they are. Those are just the seed leaves that came up almost immediately after the seeds sprouted in the tomato. No idea if they're going to grow much better. No idea if they're going to provide fruit, but consistent with the garden in place with what you have, there is something that you can use to get a tomato garden going. There is a later picture, and now they're actually quite large and really ready to transplant, or at least bump up to separate pots so they don't crowd each other out. Also, very quickly, some of the microgreens from last time are now macro greens. These are some of the snow peas that did not get eaten as microgreens, and so they got a home in the ground, and they're on their way to producing a late but hopefully significant crop of snow peas. Awesome. All right. We are right at the end of our hour. We're going to wrap up. I want to remind everybody again that we have our community resources page. We have been tracking the questions, and we'll try to put those out on the resource page. When you first log in, you'll see the place where there's videos. And if you look off to the left, there's a place called discussion. You can click discussion and join the discussion, or add to the comments or questions of your own and get responses from our online Master Gardener crew. All right. Well, last call, Master Gardeners. Anything that we need to add to the information that we've given folks? Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. We're at the top of the hour. It's time to say goodbye. Master Gardeners, if you'd stick around for 5 minutes, I'd greatly appreciate it. And everybody else, have a great time out in the garden this morning.